Hello, and welcome back to the 12th instalment of my Failed Franchises series. In this series, I look at whether defunct rail franchises should be deemed as failed, whether this be their contract being stripped from them or their franchise simply being deemed poor by the public and industry. In today's video, I'll look at the 4th instalment of my 5-part mini-series regarding the Anglian franchises. Watch part 1, 2 and 3 now. Today we'll be looking at the first operator of the newly created Greater Anglia franchise, National Express East Anglia. Although lasting 8 years, National Express East Anglia could well be classed as a failure by the public and industry for several reasons, but can they truly be classed as a failed franchise? That's what I'll be discussing in today's video.
The 57th National Express service to Shenfield, calling at Maryland, Forest Gate, Manor.
If you do enjoy, make sure you like and subscribe and check out the full series before watching this video. Firstly, we need to look at how the Anglian rail system worked upon privatisation and before the Greater Anglian franchise. Unlike today, where all services along the Great Eastern Main Line and West Anglia Main Line operated under a single franchise called the Greater Anglia franchise, upon privatisation in 1997, the region was split between 3 different franchises: the Intercity Anglian franchise, the West Anglia Great Northern franchise, and the Great Eastern franchise, which was merged into the Greater Anglia franchise in 2004. Today, as mentioned earlier, we'll look at National Express East Anglia. National Express, who also ran C2C, Central Trains, Silverlink and the Midland Mainline franchise, won the Greater Anglia franchise on the 4th of December 2003, after being shortlisted for the new franchise in April. National Express originally chose the brand name One, with it symbolising the 3 franchises coming together as one group franchise, with the National Express East Anglia brand adopted later in the franchise. One began services on the 4th of April 2004 with a 7-year contract and a possible 3-year extension being given if One met performance targets. One operated along the Great Eastern Main Line and the West Anglia Main Line, operating from London Liverpool Street towards Romford, Colchester, Ipswich and Norwich. They also operated to Shenfield, Southminster, Braintree, Sudbury, Harwich, Walton-on-the-Naze and the Romford to Upminster branch. One also operated to Stansted Airport, Cambridge and Hertford North. As well as this, they operated regional services from East Anglia towards Sheringham, Ely, Peterborough, Felixstowe, Bury St Edmunds, Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft. As for rolling stock, One inherited the full Anglian Railways and First Great Eastern Fleet, as well as parts of the West Anglia Great Northern Fleet. They inherited Class 86s, Mark II coaches, Class 150s, Class 153s, Class 170s, Class 312s, Class 315s, Class 317s, Class 321s, and Class 360s. The remaining Class 312s, the last slam door units operating in Anglia, were withdrawn immediately in 2004 and replaced by other stock cascaded from the West Anglia Great Northern lines, such as the Class 317s. As well as this, One confirmed it would be withdrawing its Mark II and Class 86 locos as part of franchise commitments, replacing them with newer Class 90s and Mark III coaches. This also came part of the removal of smoking carriages on One, with One phasing out the last Class 86s in stages from 2004 to 2005. However, back to the beginning of the franchise. Just weeks after commencing operations, there was instantly confusion over the naming. The name confused passengers, with them being confused over whether announcements were referring to the 821 service or the 820-1 service. See, even that sounds confusing. This was, however, quickly resolved by omitting the One brand name from announcements, with Jonathan Denby of One suggesting that they only had 2 months to come up with the name and branding, so there was bound to be some confusion and poor execution. What was not changed was the name Greater Anglia appearing on credit card statements, and London North Eastern Railway Limited being featured on cheques, causing confusion as to what the name of the company actually was. Despite the confusion, One pressed on with the franchise requirements. From the December 2004 timetable change, One began to run direct services between Harwich Town and London, negating the need for a change at Manningtree. Similarly, as part of the same timetable change, One announced it would be spending £11 million upgrading stations, as well as increasing the number of services from London to Lowestoft and Peterborough, using Class 170s, and increasing the frequency of the Cambridge to Ipswich service using sprinters. Also, as part of franchise commitments, One launched a new delay repay scheme for all passengers to claim money back if they were delayed by half an hour or longer. Also, One launched a new £500,000 Enjoy London campaign for TV, radio and bus advertisements, with 500,000 homes near the One network being given discounts for London attractions when using the railway. Overall, the December 2004 timetable change was received well, with One now running 3 trains an hour from Ipswich to London, as well as announcing more services towards Stansted and Hertford East from 2005, due to the Mark IIIs coming into service, which allowed other stock to be freed. As well as this, on the topic of rolling stock change, One confirmed that all 10 Class 150s and 3 out of 7 Class 153s would be sent to Central trains in return for 9 Class 156s. On April 2005, One announced summer timetable revisions to make better use of rolling stock following the mostly successful December 2004 timetable change. The changes saw times be revised and given smaller stations better services for commuters into Cambridge or Ipswich, with more services calling at Stratford, and small timing tweaks to ensure passengers did not miss registered connections. However, through services from Liverpool to Great Yarmouth, which would have been operated by One from Norwich, was scrapped following logistical challenges, which led to slower journeys as passengers had to change at Norwich to continue towards Yarmouth. Also, One had several challenging Sundays as major engineering works on the Great Eastern Main Line led to many passengers abandoning One, with One launching media campaigns to advertise the lack of Sunday engineering works from 2005 to try and win back passengers onto the railway. There was some more positive news during the back end of 2005, however, with One being ranked runner-up for Passenger Operator of the Year, with South Western Trains claiming the top spot. Judges commended One for its management of engineering works which closed the Ipswich Tunnel, as well as One meeting its punctuality targets, despite running more services. One was also praised for its station cleanliness and customer service standards. Despite this though, passengers were not totally happy with the service One offered. Several East Anglian MPs met Tim Clark, One's managing director, and Network Rail's Stuart McVernon to discuss poor punctuality on One's London to Norwich services, with the MPs correctly pointing out that a third of trains from the 2004 to 2005 period were significantly delayed, 15 minutes delayed or more, and a fifth of peak services were cancelled. The 0655 Norwich to London service had the worst performance, with 17% of trains being cancelled and only 65% arriving within 10 minutes of the scheduled arrival time. One suggested that cancelling this service proved the least disruptive, with a service just 15 minutes later, and defended One for still having good punctuality. Passengers, however, were not happy with the response, suggesting that One shouldn't have to cancel trains in the first place, with services becoming dangerously overcrowded following cancellations. Overcrowding on the West Anglia main line also led to One to reconsider its timetable and had several meetings with passengers before announcing major changes to its timetable for December. From December, services to Chingford and Cambridge Heath would run every 15 minutes, with Sunday services introduced. Also, peak services to many destinations from London Liverpool Street would be increased to 6 trains an hour, to services such as Edmonton Green. More frequent Sunday services would be introduced, and peak services from Stratford towards the Lee Valley and Cheshunt. One also confirmed Stansted Express services would run every 15 minutes, all day, every day, including Sundays, with more services from the airport towards Harlow and Bishop Stortford to benefit airport workers. One also confirmed direct London to King's Cross and Ely services would remain, with several other small frequency and timing changes aimed to improve services overall. Despite these improvements, 2005 ended in chaos for One. The punctuality not only dropped to its lowest level since beginning its operations at 81.2%, 6% below the national average, but One also had issues with the drivers' union ASLEF, with drivers threatening to strike over pay, with One suspending its managing director Tim Clark over the disputes, with them eventually being restored in 2006 in the form of a new 4.5% pay increase and a review of drivers working on rest days. Also, One's reliability on its new West Anglia mainline timetable was poor, with former One route director Mark Evans suggesting he was now focusing solely on the West Anglia mainline timetable to ensure it was working. However, Evans was replaced in December 2005 by Perry Ramsey due to the poor performance One showed, and reliability still being poor. In 2006, One said farewell to its last Mark II carriages, with the company having retained a few of the driving brake standard open coaches due to a lack of DVTs. Elsewhere, One also converted its Class 317-1s into 317-5s and -8s to improve reliability on the West Anglia main line. Also in January 2006, One began working on installing regenerative braking onto its Class 360 Desiro units to reduce costs and improve the environment. Tests showed that the Class 360s used 16% less electricity when regenerative braking was used, with all 21 360s receiving the upgrades by the end of the year, a process which coincided with Network Rail's upgrade of the Great Eastern Main Line to allow regenerative braking to be implemented. As well as this, in January, One installed CCTV cameras on 552 carriages, with all Class 315s and Class 321s, 136 units in total, receiving the upgrade. Some suggested that these improvements came far too late, and some criticised One for still lacking CCTV on its Class 317s and at stations. In February, One was praised at the National Customer Service Awards for its easy-to-follow delay repay schemes, which was one of the first of its kind. Despite some passengers receiving compensation, 70% of One's passengers, as part of a 26,000-strong survey, believed that the service was poor value for money, with this being 11% higher than the average of 61%. Despite this, the fact that nationally, only 41% of passengers believed the service was good value for money was not a good statistic, with One's rating being much lower than this. To combat this poor rating, One brought in a £5 promotion for services from Southend to London to encourage people to travel by One instead of C2C, who operated from the other Southend station. One suggested that the promotion had led to a 30% increase in ticket sales at some stations, and 16% on average. In August 2006, it was confirmed that One's service punctuality levels had finally returned to pre-Hatfield crash levels, despite the crash occurring 6 years prior. One had shot up to 89% of services being recorded as on time, arriving within 5 minutes of scheduled arrival time for regional services and 10 for intercity, from January to August 2006. As well as this, the Norwich to London Liverpool Street services increased from 79% in 2000 to 87% in 2006. Metro services from Southend and Shenfield increased 2% to 91% reliability as well. Overall though, punctuality had increased, now averaging the national level for the first time since taking over the franchise. Despite this, One had only averaged 80% of services being recorded as on time for 2006 overall, with One stating they wanted to hit the national average of 90%. In 2007, alongside Network Rail, they launched a new programme to improve reliability. Network Rail and One announced the following changes to services. Doors would now close 30 seconds before departure. A new PA system would be installed at London Liverpool Street. More efficient dispatch procedures would be put in place. Modifications to the Class 317s and Class 90s to improve power supply. And Network Rail would renew 60 kilometres of track and monitor overhead electrification on the Great Eastern Main Line once a fortnight. As well as this, a Network Rail briefing presented a report on how the Greater Anglia franchise could be improved. Network Rail suggested that Norwich to London trains should be replaced by EMUs to provide more seating by removing the need for Class 90 and DVT, and that the West Anglia services should be lengthened and more peak hour services provided. In July 2007, it was announced that, for a fourth successive period, One had achieved their best punctuality since operations began, with One averaging over 90% of services arriving on time, and 91% later in June, with One being praised for its service. However, towards the end of 2007, reliability was a much more pressing issue for One, with the company criticised for delays. Despite this, the delays weren't often One's fault, with infrastructure issues to do with the points, signals, overhead line electrification and track faults. Network Rail attempted to resolve these issues with a planned closure of London Liverpool Street during the 2007 Christmas period, but this overran into 2008, leading to huge delays and causing national press to slate One for its poor management with the delays. In January 2008, the DfT confirmed preliminary plans to allocate 1,300 extra carriages to various TOCs, including One. This came in the form of Class 321s being cascaded from other operators and new build units for Standard Express services. The plans would enable One to increase services to 12 carriages and lead to a 10% overall increase in capacity. A few days later, One was no longer a thing. As part of a group-wide rebranding exercise, One was rebranded to National Express East Anglia, or NXEA, incorporating the National Express colour scheme and branding. As part of the rebranding, NXEA announced the refurbishment of all its Class 156 units, with them being one of the first units to receive the new National Express livery. As part of the rebranding and restructuring of the company, NXEA announced that its call centre in Norwich would be closed, resulting in the loss of 73 jobs, with them being merged with other National Express call centres. As well as this, full NXEA catering was withdrawn, replaced by a trolley service. They also closed several ticket offices such as at North Walsham and Attleborough, cutting off many communities from the ticket office network as a result. These changes weren't met brilliantly by passengers, who suggested that the changes hampered the network and led to services being worse due to the lack of full catering. To make matters worse, towards the end of 2011, it was announced that, due to the increase in oil prices, fares would increase on NXEA by 6%, which was met poorly by passengers. Some fares increased by up to 9% due to the lack of regulation on them by the DfT. In 2009, it was announced that National Express East Anglia would receive 17 Class 321s from London Midland, who thus received Class 319s. As well as this, the Department for Transport confirmed 30 brand new 4-car Class 379s would be constructed for £160 million. Overall, this led to an increase of 188 extra carriages overall, with 100 new jobs created to open a new Clacton maintenance depot. Also in 2009, it was announced that NXEA would not continue as an operator past its current contract end date of 2011. The reason for the lack of extension was due to the East Coast mainline franchise, National Express East Coast, being stripped from National Express, with National Express no longer being seen as a reliable, trustworthy operator. Some passengers celebrated the news, whilst others were concerned that the loss of the franchise would lose the commitments promised in the original franchise contract. However, the Department for Transport announced that they would re-tender the franchise and allow for new promises to be made. However, following the 2010 election, the Department for Transport announced that they would change the franchise proceedings. Thus, NXEA gained a 1-year extension to continue running services whilst the bidding process continued into 2011. This meant they were able to conduct the 2010 timetable change. The change led to the London to Lowestoft and Peterborough services being shelved, as well as fewer stops on the London to Norwich service, with some stations losing many services. As well as this, NXEA scrapped its text alert system due to it being too expensive to run, which was criticised by passenger groups. However, NXEA added extra peak time services and more capacity on Ipswich to Cambridge services by running Class 170s. Also in June 2010, it was announced that the Great Eastern Main Line had brought £3.7 billion of investment across the area over the past 60 years, due to the short travel times in London and newer trains beginning operation. The Class 379s also began testing in 2010 for planned introduction of late 2011, which began operating earlier than expected in March 2011 on Stansted Express services, which made up 20% of National Express East Anglia's operating income. By 2011, it was announced that the new operator would be Abellio Greater Anglia. However, NXEA were given a short 6-month extension until 2012, whilst they confirmed the terms of the new franchise. In December 2011, National Express East Anglia met with passenger rail groups for the last time, with NXEA praising themselves on how they added 11,000 extra peak hour seats, introduced new Class 379 units that were not mentioned in the original franchise, and ended their operations with a 90% on-time rating. National Express East Anglia ceased operations on the 4th of December 2012. Overall then, although National Express East Anglia, one or whatever you want to call them, ended their operations on a high, relatively reliable services, can they be classed as a failed franchise? They did not run the most reliable service, however, and did have issues with overcrowding and service cancellations. They also had confusing branding and ran an ageing fleet with lack of catering on board. However, they did try and improve these services, and were somewhat successful at them, especially on the reliability front. Their main downfall came from their parent company failing to keep the East Coast franchise stable, a future video on National Express East Coast coming soon. Hence, National Express East Anglia were hindered by something that wasn't even directly their fault. However, the demise of National Express East Coast, through abandoning payment and leaving the franchise to run out of money, could have happened to the East Anglia franchise if the Department for Transport did not step up as they did. Although not as bad as some of the other operators we've seen in this series, they were nothing close to amazing, and lacked many aspects a successful franchise would have had. But in my opinion, the fact that they were technically stripped of their franchise is the main reason I personally would class them as a failed franchise. But what do you think about NXEA/1? Let me know in the comments below, and do subscribe so you don't miss the remainder of this Anglian mini-series as I answer whether the Greater Anglia franchise is truly better than the 3 franchises prior. Also, do consider joining my channel and become a member to get some cool perks, such as access to private Discord channels and access to videos early. Special thanks to my first class member, Mia Jane, and my Business Zone members, Anthony Harris and Smudgy Cat. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my Twitter, Discord and Instagram in the links below, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.